Hello and welcome everyone to LACHC's Let's Talk About It podcast. I'm Renee Smith, the Director of Advancement at LACHC, and I'm here today with Alisa Orduña, Dr. Orduña, actually, to just chat about really her work and specifically how she came into how she came into a commitment to see through some work to draw community together to end homelessness. She's been working in this area for more than 2 decades. I think just recently she completed her doctoral work while in COVID after leaving the city of Santa Monica. And I think I first encountered you were with the city of Los Angeles. And not only is she a consummate policy person and community builder, but she also has a great heart for the people. And I'm so happy to welcome her here with us. And I want to start off our podcast today with a custom that I really learned from participating with Dr. Orduña and the Skid Row planning group.
The action plan.
The action plan. And we start off with like a land acknowledgement. And so I want to open it up and ask Dr. Orduña to start us off with a land acknowledgement.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, Renee, for having me in that beautiful introduction. So this one is adopted from LA County, and so it covers the entire county. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tatavian, Serrano, the Keats, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments.
Amen. That's what we would say. Ashe.
Ashe and amen. That's right. That's right.
When I first experienced the land acknowledgement, it just really helped to center me on kind of where we are, the place, and also kind of what is at stake. Why do you think it's important in your experience and what you've been doing this work? Why did you think this was an important thing to do as you open up the action plans, meetings, and through the processes that you guys established?
So I would say for me, from a spiritual perspective first, that land and wherever we go, cities or communities, neighborhoods, hold multiple stories. And in this time where gentrification occurs and there's like this rebuilding or rewriting of stories of communities, it's always important to remember, how is this community founded? Who were the original inhabitants of it? What were their contributions? What changed? What policies, like, were they forced out of their community? Were they here together? Did they prosper? Did they decide to leave? Just really understanding that history so that when we plan forward, we have a beautiful acknowledgement of that history. And if there were a trauma that created, we don't reproduce that trauma, or we don't silence the trauma that happens. And I would say, in particular for the Skid Row Action Plan, one of the key components that plan came out of a motion by Supervisor Hilda Solis. And the language of that original motion was to redress and repair past policies that created the status quo in Skid Row. And so we have to recognize going back to the original inhabitants and what happened to them. And it's more recent history, but when I think of our American Indian, Alaskan Native siblings, I think of Indian Alley in Skid Row, which is like off of 4th and Winston. And that was an area where there was through federal policy that relocated many of our American Indian Alaskan Native siblings out of the reservations and other areas into urban areas. Many came to Los Angeles, and in fact, we have one of the largest urban indigenous populations in the country. And at the time, many had relocated to Bunker Hill, but of course, similar to Skid Row, as the redevelopment of Bunker Hill was taking place, they were dislocated and moved over to a particular section of Skid Row around Indian Alley. Many just ended up sleeping there, unhoused. Their substance use, mental health, just from the trauma of being dislocated and detached from their communities. And it's where United American Indian Involvement, one of the larger healthcare centers for that community, was actually founded right on the corner of Indian Alley. And so it's like those are histories that we have to understand, because sadly, when we think of indigenous communities, we think of, colonial times or pre-settlers. And it's like, no, these communities are active, alive, many, are thriving or surviving today. And it's just out of respect that we're guests in their homelands that we give them that respect through the land acknowledgement.
I'd never heard of the Indian Alley thing. Now, I know the story of Skid Row's history as it relates to it really being a landing place, I guess, in the 30s and 40s, or the 20s to the 40s, for temporary workers, right?
Mm-hmm,
And the
mm-hmm.
skids and all that. But I didn't know about like the relocation in around Winston, which is where our original clinic was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it actually makes me think a lot about that location, the 311 Winston, which is located right behind the LA Mission. And really kind of the miraculous story about how that clinic was even started. Um, so these lands and the people and their histories are certainly, you know, we have to include them as a part of where we're going. So
That's right. That's right.
So, Dr. Orduña, tell me like what you've been up to. How did you end up being a facilitator for the Skid Row Action Plan? How did that come about?
It came about, so when we met, I was working for the previous mayor, Mayor Garcetti, as his director of homelessness policy. And my direct boss was Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley.
Oh,
And if you know Deputy Mayor
yep,
Shockley, she's all about community. And
yeah,
day one, when she started, because we had a previous Deputy Mayor, Kelly Bernard, who was
oh yes,
awesome, and she left to the private sector. So when Brenda came in, she said, I don't care what you do, but you prioritize Skid Row. And I was like, that's all I needed to hear. What do we need to do? And at that time, we were right before the hepatitis A pandemic. And the advocates like LA Can and USEP and some of the other organizations were talking about the need for more public toilets. Like there just weren't not enough. And LA Can had did, I think, 2-part series of the Dirty Divide and named that Skid Row, if it were a refugee camp, that we don't even have the basic infrastructure that a refugee camp would have. And that we're in the fifth largest economy in the world, and Los Angeles, and, all these things, that was just unconscionable. And so the first project that we did was met with the community for 8 months to develop the Skid Row Refresh Spot, which was a pilot for showers, laundry, and toilets for people of Skid Row, which is now expanded. Originally, we were on Crocker Street, and now it's on Town Street, and a little bit expanded, open 24 hours, 7 days a week. But it was that community process that we did. This was literally my coworker Zita and I. We just kind of went like after hours of work, went over. USEP is located next to Gladys Park, or now General Jeff Memorial Park. And we just met with the community, and it was not the provider community, but people that may have lived in tents, or they lived in some of the permanent supportive housing units, or maybe lived in cars or may have been housed but are still active. So meeting with them for 8 months and really listening to them. So the design of it, and I think why the Skid Row Refresh Spot is so successful, is because it really came out of the hearts and minds of the community. Everything from the providers to having music when you walk in, to having a place where pets could go and um, uh, charge your phones, like all the artwork, like all of the things, and the whole thing around safety versus like security, and all of that really made an impact. And I think it was having built that trust with the community that the county wanted to then bring me in with when they were doing the Skid Row action plan, and when Department of Health Services was charged with actually doing the community engagement for that piece.
Yeah, um, coming into Skid Row and working uh, in Skid Row is a big deal. I can recall when I had my first job here as a fundraiser, and one of the first questions that I pressed was, what do I say? What can I do to get people outside of here to care about the people here? Now, I understood why I cared, because I really saw my family members in these experiences. I have a cousin who is addicted and lives in Skid Row. I have had an aunt who died on the street as an alcoholic, um, and another uncle who uh, was a Vietnam vet who had PTSD and had mental health issues. And so I really felt like it was my family, and even though those people had certain life experiences, um, from my perspective, they were all brilliant, beautiful, and contributed greatly to my life. So I understood my personal reason for caring about all of this. How did you come to understand why you cared to take on not just your job, but take on that added, really, blanket of care and commitment to transforming and changing things here?
Such a good question. And first, sorry for the loss that you experienced, and pray for your family that's still out there, at least for their safety and their well being and all.
Thank you.
I would say for me, so I grew up in Los Angeles and then Pasadena, and went away for college, went away to grad school, and ended up living in Philadelphia for 16 years.
Mm.
And that was just a major transformative experience in my lifetime. That's where I entered into homelessness services and also community development, working for a local council person there. And at the time, the previous mayor had focused on like revitalization of downtown, so all your cultural institutions and hotels and all. But Mayor John Street focused on the neighborhoods, and Philly had a lot of abandoned buildings because of the collapse of the economy, and people were going west or south or wherever. And so we really worked with community groups to say, what do you want for your neighborhood? We have these abandoned houses, we have abandoned lots. What is your vision? Should we bring in an affordable housing developer? Should we turn it into a park? Should the school expand? Like, what do you want? And we were able to go neighborhood by neighborhood and really develop these comprehensive plans that through a participatory process, and then bring in the resources to help implement that. And there's a community in Philadelphia called Mantua, and Mantua has some of the, at the time, greatest like health disparities. In particular, like we were looking at high HIV rates, high infant mortality rates, and it was a community that was just north, literally a block or two from the University of Pennsylvania, so one of the most wealthiest universities in the country. And here you have this pocket of poverty that was happening. And so really had done some work with that community. In that community, to build trust, you have to show up. So showing up to funerals, because there were a lot of shootings and drug involvement and things like that, to birthday parties, to community meetings, and working with that community. We had developed like about 5 different projects in that community with that community. So having that experience, fast forward, moved back home around 2011, And while I was gone, I wasn't here during the 1992 civil unrest that happened. So, having grown up in South LA in particular, and even Pasadena, working for United Way, which is downtown, kind of on the cusp around 12th and Olive, so almost before you get to Skid Row. But just on my job from journeying down Martin Luther King Boulevard, up Main or Los Angeles Street to kind of cut over to, or Olive, to cut over, I would start to see these encampments, and the encampments were full of our folks, of African American folks, and or people pushing at that time. We didn't have as many tents, so people were like outside on the cardboard or with the shopping carts, and it just felt apocalyptic to me. It felt like what happened, as a child growing up and seeing strong Black-owned businesses and homeowners and a sense of community. I had an uncle who was a World War II veteran who was unhoused. He just, after coming back from war, was not comfortable living indoors. And so he would hang out around Arlington or Jefferson, and we would go look for him in like the barbershop or, some mainly barbershop or the local bar. And my mom would go and say, "Where have you seen Ray?" And, someone would say, "Oh, yeah, he's up on the roof or he's back in one of the garages," and give him a minute, we'll come out. And this man in a flannel shirt would come out. And so I remembered that sense of community, that even people that were experiencing houselessness were still cared for by community. And it felt like we were at this tipping point where we could no longer care for community. And then through that, just more and more interaction with Skid Row, I'm like, you know what? Skid Row is like one of the largest Black communities in LA, but the level of poverty and trauma and suffering is ridiculous. And I think too, coming after a lot of the research around post Katrina and how Katrina evacuees, and it's just like, if this were any other population, would Skid Row be able to exist? And so the passion was a real deep care for community and knowing that there were other possibilities. And that actually even led to my dissertation. My dissertation was, why is there an overrepresentation of African American men in Los Angeles's homelessness system? What is happening here? What is this crisis trying to tell us? What's going on? But
I want to read that. Oh my God, do tell. Do
I will
tell. Give me a
share it.
highlights. Right? I know I have my ideas. You
Yeah,
actually
I mean,
studied it.
that's a psychology, depth psychology research. So it goes back historically and just, why we were brought to this country through force,
Mhm.
um, uh, the transatlantic slave trade, and then all the policies, particular after the Civil War. Like the first vagrancy laws were, if you didn't have proof that you had a job, we were arrested and sent to kind of like what do you call, like we would then become contracted labor, so it
Back to
was
work
slavery
camps.
but
Yeah.
not slave, so it's like when I
Mhm.
hear some of the policies around sweeps today or around vagrancy or the criminalization we're seeing, watching the Supreme Court, what's happening around homelessness, like I feel like these are all rooted in post reconstruction law and policy. And so I think, so anyway, that has a lot to do with it. But the passion just comes from a genuine love and concern of community and knowing that nationwide, the crack epidemic really impacted a lot of our communities. And I think we're still rebuilding generations later, from that. And just knowing that the Philadelphia experience taught me things were possible that weren't necessarily happening in LA, but didn't mean that they couldn't happen. I know that was a
And
lot. Sorry.
yeah. you know, you've well, first of all, my hometown is Santa Monica, so I grew up there, like from kindergarten on up, and my family's from there, and I can almost recall because there was like there was a hospital or like a inpatient place in Santa Monica, and I remember when it closed down in I guess it was the early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and the beach was a common, we walk to the beach and go to the beach. And I remember um, after that institution, whatever it was, closed down, because I was a young kid. We noticed that there were more people living on the beach, right? It's almost like I can remember when that shift happened,
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I actually grew up on Virginia Avenue in Santa Monica. And there was a man who, I don't even know if he was homeless or not, but we called him Mr. Shorty. And
Mm.
Mr. Shorty would push a cart, like he had stuff in his cart, and we'd be playing around. And if we bothered him or tried to get stuff out of his basket, he would pull his teeth out and scare us away or whatever. Mr. Shorty was harmless, but he was a part of the community as long as I could tell. Um, but I think that some of the complicated issues and trauma that people are facing living on the street, I often wonder, what are the policies? Like, what policies uh, what policies have you been engaged with or familiar with that you feel have been the most promising, or what kind of policies need to emerge? I know our mayor really has a focus on addressing the issues of homelessness through housing and supportive services, and I'm certainly pleased with all of that, but it certainly does seem like it's really never one size fits all, and that being in connection with community, and that's kind of a unique thing for every individual, um, is what can improve a quality of life. So, and you've have experience in policy. What are your thoughts about current policies around homelessness and people getting services and access to care and all of that?
I would say the first, and I think this was a major paradigm shift, was linking the homelessness crisis to access to housing. So making sure that housing has to be a part of the solution, because for a long time it wasn't. It was like build a shelter or transitional housing
Temporary.
or, go to drug rehab or something, but it wasn't that connection to access to housing. And so our housing first policy, at least in theory, I think is a significant policy shift. Now, how we implement it, I don't think we've actually perfected it yet. I don't think we've given the rehousing process enough resources to provide those wraparound services or that case management or that extra piece around really connecting to community, which is so important. It's like we think it's good that we give someone keys and we move them to the house and it's like, whoo, okay, job well done. And it's like, no, the real work is now going to begin because
Taking them in.
whatever trauma or experiences they had that led into homelessness, and while that they were experiencing homelessness, I think of myself at the end of a long day. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm waking up, freaking out because, oh my God, I didn't do that report or I didn't do whatever. Or whatever is like hidden on your mind comes to view. So imagine you're by yourself in this unit. Now, what support do you have? Who do you talk to? And so we see people falling out of housing or just decomposing, while they were placed in housing. So I think we have to do a much better job around that community connection. Everything from things that we take for granted, just personally in helping people make that transition into housing and staying committed, how to use the washing machine and dryer. Like I've had some people that have experienced chronic homelessness, meaning they were out on the streets for a couple of years. And so they were used to maybe going to the local church to buy clothes. It gets dirty. You throw those away, you go back to the church and get another pair of clothes. Or food, the same thing with food. You forgetting how to cook or how to store food in a refrigerator or in a cabinet or read the labels of what's expired. Like all those things that again we take for granted. You have to one-on-one, kind of teach people, or if our programs could provide classes for people, and make it fun for them so they don't feel it's mandatory but want to attend. But anyway, all those life skills and that transition piece, I think we have to do a much better job at funding it. So the connection to housing is what I would say is first. And then I think the access to healthcare, it's more than like when you engage someone with the street, the process of getting into housing could take so long and people have so many other needs. And like I will always respect LA Christian Health Center because one of the first interactions I had with you, I remember touring the site, but I think it was LA Mission I don't remember if it was like Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you were washing the feet
The
of
foot
people.
washings.
The
Yeah.
foot,
Yeah.
like that just left
Hmm.
such a powerful impact of reducing othering and like the destigmatization. And it was just like, I'm caring for my relative or I'm caring for my sibling. And so it's, how do we do that through outreach and engagement? And I think we're starting to get there, like through the multidisciplinary teams where you have a clinician, you have a doctor or nurse practitioner, you have a substance use counselor, you have a peer. And so it's like we're treating people holistically and saying, okay, yes, we get your goal is housing, but are there other activities or services that we can do for you right now? Maybe it's checking your foot for wound care, or helping you access a certain kind of food. Because just because you experience homelessness doesn't mean you may not have a gluten allergy, or you may be trying to manage your diabetes and you keep going to, let's say, a local food pantry, but it's processed food and all that doesn't really help you. So it's all those. So the multidisciplinary teams and kind of this comprehensive outreach approach, I think, is kind of the second policy that I see as promising. And then the third is it's not really a policy, but recognizing that the subpopulations have unique needs. So I see a lot now happening with youth and young adults that are experiencing homelessness, and youth that have gone through that experience, like these leadership positions being created for them to really be at the table designing programs and interventions, and designing policy. The same with like unaccompanied women, like the work that Downtown Women's Center does. So I think there's hope in, like you said, it's not one size fits all, but it is this incorporation of people with lived expertise into every room and at every table and at every stage, so that we really are cultivating, developing policies and solutions and programs that make sense to people and that will help improve their life outcomes.
Yeah. I often wonder, you know, in society, how we're all so connected to our technology, right? We can do everything on the phone. I could order food. I can write a letter. I can like handle a lot of things
Mm-hmm.
um, with my technology.
Mm-hmm.
But it we cannot forget that human connect, right? Um, the ability to see a person and hear them, and be supportive in what they want as an outcome for themselves. One of the things we've had a deep infusion of intensive case management resources and more case managers out there working intensively with people who really require additional taps every week. The connection. And I feel like even though we see that is certainly a need in building community, helping people to improve the quality of their lives by connecting with others. It's, to me, it's an indication for all of us to look at things and to remember that human connection, and that ability to see people for the best of who they are and to build on their assets.
Right.
So um, we at LA Christian, the foundation of why we do the work is really from the inspiration in our faith. That really, I think, at the purest way of expressing it for me is that we're all God's beloveds, right? And whatever your conception of God or creator is, that every creation is beloved. And so when you walk the streets, and our clinic was started by a nurse who worked at LA Mission, who really wanted to do more for people who she saw were dying on the streets from HIV and AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
and that she wanted to provide more services for that. And out of that grew this, multifaceted way of engaging with people, whether it was through dentistry or optometry. And I think a lot, I know that policy, I always think policy is really about housing and those supportive service, but, faith or having some faith connection helps to motivate people. And also being plugged into that healthcare relationship is really could be an awesome component for people on their walk to wellness, from getting from where they are to the next step in their engagement. I also want to just ask you more about the action plan. And you guys published it and put it out. I think it was the end of last year. That was like November or December, like it was in the winter. What's happening now with it? Like what is going on? I know the groups are still meeting to some degree, but what's happening now with all of those efforts and things?
So thank you. So the Skid Row Action Plan, we did about a 6 month. Well, we in 2022 we kind of launched our initial engagement when the motion was introduced, and to kind of solidify, it was in 7 areas: a new healthcare clinic, a drug harm reduction health hub, more interim housing, more permanent supportive housing, more economic development opportunities, etc. And so we were able to kind of solidify, like, what does that mean to the community? What are their desires and priorities? And then last year in 2023, led another 6-month process where it's like, okay, how do we turn these into work plans? How do we turn these into more specific recommendations for the county on how we could say, yes, we want to increase permanent housing, but how do you do it? And what's the
What's
level
the
of
price tag?
quality? And
Yeah.
what's the price tag, and who's going to work there, and how do people get
Mm-hmm,
selected for this
mm-hmm,
housing, and all of that. So
mm-hmm.
that's what we did. And thank you to LA Christian Health Center for hosting us during those
Yeah.
community design sessions.
Those design sessions were so exciting too. I have to say they were so exciting, and the innovation around what was needed was just awesome to participate and witness.
It was.
And yeah, I could almost see the centers. I could see them in the words and the actions. Like I really felt like the energy was there, that it was possible, right? That we weren't just pulling pie from the sky.
No, and I think the beauty of that, just for your listeners who may not be aware of it, was that in that room you had people that with lived experience, like recent lived experience. You had providers, you had government workers, you had sometimes philanthropy or like other nonprofits that participated. You had the arts organizations like Urban Voices Project and 526 Studio, which is an art studio for local artists and the Skid Row community. And so I think it was that collective power sharing and knowledge sharing that made these recommendations practical, pragmatic, and a little bit aspirational to move us beyond kind of the status quo. And so a final report was just released, I think, last week, through Change World Project, which is the consultant that I worked with on carrying this work. And our understanding, they're going to do a community report out, I think, next Tuesday at Department
Okay.
of Health Services. And they're going to start, they've already been meeting with the various county departments in charge of each of the recommendations. So Department of Public Health or Health Services or Housing or Workforce Development, to really begin implementing them. And they're one of the most exciting parts. And it's interesting, they came out of the community. So there was this bucket that was called like additional community or additional recommendations or miscellaneous or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And that became one of the most powerful ones because those were community driven and focused on economic opportunity and
Oh
ways of
yes,
keeping
yes. This is
community, engaged with like stipends or honorariums to honor their contributions. So my understanding is that an intermediary will be stood up within Skid Row to kind of manage all of that, kind of almost like an air traffic controller of connecting community residents to new opportunities created through these projects, or residents that want to do entrepreneurship or self-employment, how do they get license or insurance or, all the things so that they can be successful with what they do, as well as funding for those like soft funding. So for like the arts program, or I'm sure you have needs where, there's certain like hiring peer specialists, or maybe you're providing food or you're providing arts class or something like that for your members, that those kind of activities aren't always cost reimbursed by the major contracts. So you need soft funding to fulfill those gaps. And so this intermediary would kind of be that like partner with government, but really community driven and community focused. And to me, that's the most exciting part that I'm looking forward to coming out of the plan.
Yeah, no, it's very exciting, and I think that for the people who participated in it, I hope that they do get to see, you know, things come to life and change come that really impacts, the quality of things here in Skid Row. One of our top needs is just retaining and attracting and keeping and holding on to staff, staff and providers, because it's not an easy thing to be in bearing in people's uh, pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And I want to, we have spent some time in the last couple of years establishing like our own internal staff wellness groups, which we, try to do things periodically out of our Joshua House clinic where staff can come in and color.
Mm-hmm.
They can plant, things because, when you're working, seeing patients or seeing clients every day, that um, having that opportunity to diffuse that stress of it, or to get
Mm-hmm.
that of one of the we've had a chance to have Father Boyle talk to our staff in the
Oh,
past, and
wow.
one of the things that he shared with us that I thought was so amazing was, it was during COVID, and people experienced a lot of fatigue during that time, especially healthcare workers.
Mm-hmm.
And people asked him about, well, Father Boyle, what do we do? Like, I'm so tired. Like, it's just, it's a lot, right? And he, in his great wisdom and humility, essentially said that one of the things that he learned about enduring in this work is to make it a priority to be connected to his source, to God, to divine
Yeah.
source, and to recognize that that source is an unending power and altogether able to resolve things, and that's where the power resides. So anytime I feel like I'm tired because I'm doing this, I got to recognize that really this is not the thing, right? It's whatever the creator is doing through me, and that I
Mm-hmm.
need to just be available
That's
and
right.
responsive and clear to be the light, to be love to people,
Yeah.
and not in my own strength. Uh, because it's not enough, and that collectively, when we're able to do that, whether we're passing the bar or the band to someone else to care for someone, that is ultimately that chain, an unbreakable chain, which I think is what community is really about, is when we'll see the end of homelessness, right?
That's right.
um
You know, if if I may, as you were talking about that, like that connection to source, and that, like, how do you find that daily inspiration? Because even sometimes in our faith, we become weary and weathered, because you may not be, you may be thinking about the change you want, and you may not be seeing it. And I was telling my partner the other day, I remember my mom lived in Philadelphia when she passed away. We lived on the same street, just a couple houses over. And I remember the day she passed away, I was coming out her house because, I had just was over there in pajamas or something and was coming home to get dressed before people started coming to the house. And I remember walking down the street and it's like a lot of row houses, so you don't have very many trees. And in fact, I think it was a weed. I don't even think it was a real tree. But I just remember the leaves were blowing. And I just had this moment of like, this is kind of the worst day that I've experienced in my life. And it was just something about the gentleness of the leaves blowing that reminded me that God's work and his inspiration is all around us at all times, even in our worst moments. And one of the things I've always appreciated about the Skid Row community is the way people care for one another. And sometimes it's the smallest thing, like if you're walking from site to site or building or just walking down the street and, people will say good morning or good afternoon or how you doing? Or you may just see someone braiding someone's hair, or you see someone pushing someone in a wheelchair up on a curb because the curb isn't cut properly, or there's a crack in the sidewalk. And so they're helping the person navigate. Or I've seen people like give clothes, literally off their back to someone else. And so I think that source is that even if it's weary within us, sometimes you just have to take a pause and just look around you and like really look, like open your eyes in such a different way and look beyond the misery to find that human connection, that human spark, that human spirit that is adding. There is another layer of vibrancy that is happening even in some of the most dire conditions. And so just wanted to offer that because I know sometimes, again, I just know faith can be weary and you're like, wait, is God listening to me? Is something like we question, which is something we all go through. And just knowing God is always present, and or your source, or whatever your belief is, it's always present. So what are ways that you can find that inspiration to that?
Yeah. And it certainly is in the breeze, right? It's in the sunshine,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
in the
The
breath,
sunsets, the breath.
right? It's
Mm-hmm.
in the breath.
Yeah.
And um and 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 really, of the folks that I've interviewed and talked to and gotten to know as a part of this community, it really amazes me the resiliency of the human spirit and our ability to have gratitude, to be grateful, um, and I started working. I've been with LA Christian for almost 10 years. But prior to that, I worked with another organization. And I remember my first day at the clinic on Winston, and I was walking walking to the clinic. And while I was at the other organization, I worked with a woman, Molly Reisman, and she and I started um, we started a storytellers core with the organization that we were with. And so we spent like 8 weeks with about 24 or a dozen folks who had been chronically homeless, who were now housed. And we worked with different experts and tried to support them in telling their stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I knew a few people or whatever, but my first day at LA Christian, walking into Joshua House when it was on Winston, someone says, "Hey, Renee," like I felt like there is community. Like here I am turning the corner around Indian Alley off of Winston and Third, and here's someone, speaking to me, and it really is community. There really is a community, and people really do care for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Toni Morrison, there was an interview that she did, and people were asking about the kind of stories that she tells. And she said something to the effect of, I always find it more interesting to tell a story through the lens of what love would do versus what um, what is carnal. Like, if someone hits you, you hit them back. Like, or, if you're hurt, you obviously you hurt someone else. But it's always interesting to look at people and their circumstances and what happens to them. And we look at them through the lens of what they do because of love. And certainly that is at the root of our Christian faith, my Christian faith, which is, God so loved the world that he
Mm-hmm.
gave, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that love ultimately is the thing that will resolve all the things when we
Mm-hmm.
can do that for each other, you
And I
know?
think
So,
that is so important, especially in regards to Skid Row. Like when you're outside of Skid Row and you talk to people about it, it's like people don't see Skid Row as a neighborhood or as a community. And oftentimes the contributions that they want to make are in the framework of charity. And
oh,
charity is like it's just a different power relationship versus if you lead with love, like you're leading with this understanding that we're both humans having an experience. And it just, to me, guides you into different questions versus assuming what people want, asking them what they want, asking, like you said, walking down the street and just saying hello to people, making eye contact. If you remember their name, call their name or their nickname or, whatever it is. And I love that, like lead with love, because I think we have to move beyond charity. We have to move toward that. You talked about the community building and community empowerment and relationship building. And I think that's where we're often missing in our interaction with folks in Skid Row or Hollywood, or in other communities. And that it's just like, what would you do? Or assume, this is your family member or this is, someone of the human family. So how do you accompany them versus trying to save them or trying to judge them or trying to lift them up out of poverty? No, tap into that person's resilience and their strength and their own goals and hopes and desires, and how, and ask them, how can I show up for you? And I think that is the ethic of love when it comes to this kind of work.
yeah, yeah. And I'm always amazed, and I always feel like I'm enriched so much more than I than what I think I have to offer to understand how um because people's stories, we can all relate to different aspects of that human experience, being abandoned,
Mm-hmm.
being treated less than,
Mm-hmm.
or feeling insecure, or being hurt by someone who was supposed to protect you, or
Mm-hmm.
all of those things are part of our human experience.
That's right.
What would the world, what what would it look like when all of this is solved? What is your highest hope
Whew.
for this community, for Skid Row, for Los Angeles? Like, what does it look like? What is it going to feel like when we have to take our great grands or to a museum to
Mm-hmm.
show them this is what it
What
this is what it was, right? Like, this is what happened.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, one, I think we have to move beyond a mindset of scarcity
Mm,
into a mindset of abundance.
abundance,
And
yes.
that, again, whatever faith and whatever source that would not put us here without the resources to thrive and to be successful. And that constraints that we have are man made or human made. And so if it's a policy around housing not being a human right, or if it's a policy around the lack of universal health care or access to universal health care, or, all the things that we're even seeing in the news, the erosion, of this kind of more collectivist mindset and this mindset of abundance, I think we have to start there. And so it's around um, more access, more resources, and that some things would just be fundamental human rights like housing and healthcare and education and quality education, so people don't have
Clean
to make choices.
water, yeah, good
Clean water,
food choices.
like all the basics. And I think
Mm,
it would, we'll always find something to argue or fight about. That's just human nature,
yeah,
so I
yeah.
don't think it's going to be 100% peaceful. But I do think people will have their basic needs to be able to thrive and to live the life that they want to do, and that we don't prioritize things like the professionals over the arts,
Mm,
or
mm,
military over community investment or community
mm,
care. So I imagine a world where if someone is born with neurodiversity or a form of mental illness, that instead of saying, well, what do we do with this person? It's more like, what gifts do they still have to offer? And having the infrastructure to be able to bring that out of them. If it's substance use, people use substance use all the time. Not everyone is going to be abstinent. So how can people use safely, and how can they have access to other alternatives? Maybe there's a workforce development, like building bicycles or doing artwork or something like that, that in those moments they're not using because their mind is focusing more on purpose, and that they're not being judged and going into this kind of internal cycle of, I might as well use because no one else is, likes me or whatever. And so that we just have a deeper understanding for people, and that we also move away from this idea of segregation. Like our whole model of success is like a pyramid, and it's like the top, you go to the pyramid toward the more the smaller point,
It's
the
more
more
narrow.
successful, the
There's
more
fewer. Yeah.
exclusive, the more, and I just think that hurts us because
Mm.
we're humans, and some of that's not true. A recession could hit tomorrow, so you were at the top of the pyramid, now you're back at the bottom, so all of that's temporary anyway. So why not build community where you have like mixed income, mixed races, mixed, just diverse cultures of food options, whatever it is. But that, I think, getting toward a world like a beloved community, those are the things that I look at, like radical hospitality, a sense of belonging, a place where everyone has whatever their contribution is, it's honored and it's valid, and there's enough way to find space so that that contribution can be seen and uplifted. And again, I don't expect everyone to be peaceful. I don't expect for everyone to carry a gun though, like we are now, or like all
The
the
violence.
social
Yeah.
violence and all that we're
Yeah.
seeing. I think that
Yeah.
comes more out of desperation, and again,
Yeah.
people thinking, I have to get mine because no one else is looking out for me. I want the community like I grew up in, where people know, they looked at you, couldn't go around the block without getting in trouble, or someone calling your mom saying, is Alisa supposed to be over here on her roller skates? Like, no, but like that's the kind of community that I hope we at least get back to a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Orduña, for chatting with me today. And
Thank
I want
you.
us to just take half a moment to meditate on that vision of
Hmm.
radical love and kinship and support, and a place for everyone, um, for the for there to be love and peace, and for provision, for abundance to prevail for all of us.
That's right. Shay, and amen to that. Yes.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. I'm going
Thank
to follow up with
you.
you because I want to make sure I get that report that's coming out. You said you think in a few days or so. I want to make
Hmm.
sure that I get that and that we'll post. But thank you so much. Is there
Thank
anything else you
you.
want to say, share before we close it out?
No, just thank you for all that you do. There is such a strong intersection between health and homelessness. Many people fall into homelessness because of a healthcare crisis, or not having insurance, or not being able to afford medication. And you're there right at the front line of people in need. And your staff provides it with so much care and compassion. And so just want to uplift the work of you and your team and your staff. And for those that are contemplating leaving, don't leave yet. We're trying to
Thank you.
change conditions so that
Hang
you
on.
could stay, hang on, whatever you need to hang on. Just know that you are of value, you're seen, and you're definitely appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this
You're
opportunity.
well, I should say, what's on the board for you next? Like, what's coming up next, or what's in the hopper for you? Are you writing? You speaking? Facilitating? What's going on?
Doing a couple of facilitations,
Okay.
so with
Okay.
a
Very
couple of
good.
projects, which I'm
Okay.
really excited about because it's
Okay.
bridging personal relationships. But writing, I
Oh,
need to
wow.
do that. I just need to carve out time to do that, and I think I'm nervous of doing that. But yeah, there's a book I wanna write. So
Okay. Well, get at it.
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you
All right.
again. I really appreciate
Okay.
it.
Thank you. Be blessed.
Okay,
Bye,
you too.
everybody. We'll see you guys next month. Bye bye.
Bye.